Charles. It's great to be here. It's lovely to see Rob and Lucian, who are colleagues from one of my former lives. The deal is I'll tell you anything you want. I'll tell you exactly what I think. I'm really interested in hearing what you think. So you can rustle up some really challenging questions for me in a moment. Charles said my sort of hinterland is I spent a lot of my adult life in the Foreign Office, living and working abroad. Ended up as High Commissioner in India, which is where I work closely with Rob. Happy to talk about any of that and the world, international affairs, and I'd like to do that. But I've been Chief Executive of the Environment Agency for the last 6 years. And the way to think about the Environment Agency is it's basically a big flood defence organisation that spends a lot of its time seeking to protect people against flooding, welded to a big environmental protection organisation that seeks to protect and enhance the environment, including, Charles said, through regulating polluting industries. But the main thing it does, and the main thing I want to talk to you about, is tackle the climate emergency. And as I talk about this, and they gave me a speech, but I'm not going to use it because I'd rather just sort of talk to you informally. I want to kind of start by reassuring you that things aren't as bad as they might seem. There's a lot of climate anxiety around. There's a lot of well-founded concern about the way that the world is going. There's a lot of equally well-founded concern about climate. I'll tell you about those things in a moment. But I think if you just stand back and think a bit about the world that we're now living in, and the world that you're going out into as young adults, actually, I don't think there's ever been a better time to be a human on this planet. So why do I say that? Well, just think about the kind of things that we now have in the world that we live in. This is a world in which, as I saw in India, for the first time ever in human history, billions and billions of people are being lifted out of poverty. This is a world in which, and we should celebrate that, this is a world in which there's never been a better time to be born a girl, although girls and women clearly still have some major challenges. This is a world in which a child born in Japan tonight will live to be 100. That's the life expectancy now of a child born in a developed country. This is a world in which, if you look back over the sweep of history, there is less conflict than there has ever been in human history, and therefore less people dying and suffering as a result of those conflicts. If you look at the governments that we have in this world, this is a world in which there is greater number of democracies in this world of ours, where people can choose the governments that they live under than we've ever experienced. This is a world in which you don't need me to tell you, all of us have, in our pockets, access to all the sum of human knowledge that has ever been accumulated. And when you start to sort of sit back and think about those things, that's quite a long list of good stuff. So I just want you to kind of just remember that as we talk about some of the challenges, that there are really some amazing things happening in this world, and there are good reasons to be upbeat about it. Climate. One of the things that so you said, Charles, I spent a bit of time at Harvard, and I spent a bit of time there at the Harvard Business School. And what they teach you at Harvard Business School, if you are an aspiring chief executive, is that the main thing is to make sure that the main thing really is the main thing. And what they mean by that is, if you're running a business or organisation, you just need to understand what the really important thing is, and you need to make sure that you and the organisation are focused on that. Well, the main thing for all of us, for this planet now, is the climate emergency. Why do I say that? Well, I think you probably know enough about what's driving the climate emergency. But a short version, ever since the Industrial Revolution, which started in this amazing part of England, the accumulation of carbon that's being put out into the atmosphere, largely from fossil fuels. It's gradually starting to heat up the atmosphere. That is having all sorts of effects on the planet's weather and ecosystems. Notably, when you get warmer air, it holds more water, so you get more flooding. You also get more extremes of weather, so you get more drought. As the ice caps and the glaciers melt, you get rising sea level. As temperatures rise, you don't just get drought, but you get wildfires and all the other things that you can see on your TV screen pretty much every evening now. So it's real, this emergency, and it's potentially catastrophic. If we don't tackle the climate emergency, then it really will be the end of the world. I mean, there will still be a planet, but our ability not just to live the lifestyles that we want, or to run the economy that we want, or to have all the things that we want for ourselves and for our kids and our grandchildren, that won't exist anymore. And worse than that, even worse than that, it's not just the humans who are going to suffer. If we don't tackle the climate emergency, the effects on everything else that lives on this fantastic planet of ours will also be extremely damaging. And we're already seeing evidence of growing crisis in biodiversity, which is largely linked to this climate crisis. So, point one, if you think it's bad, it's bad. Second point, however, this is a man-made crisis, and whilst humans, as I think you can see from what we've done to climate, can do some very dumb things, humans are also incredibly inventive. And have so far, we have managed as a species to think our way out of any problem that has been thrown at us. And I'm confident that we can think and act our way out of the problem that we've confronted and constructed for ourselves, which is the climate emergency. Because we know what the answer is, we know how we fix this problem. It's actually quite simple. It's basically two things that you need to do. You need to mitigate the amount of carbon and other greenhouse gases that are coming out into the atmosphere. You need to get them down as low as possible, which is what net zero is all about, getting to a position where we're no longer putting out any more carbon than we are sealing away. So that's one side of the fix, mitigation, get the carbon down to zero. And we also know what the other side of the fix is, which is talked about less, but is equally important, and that's adaptation. That is adapting our cities and our economies and our lifestyle and our diet and everything else to the changes in climate that are going to happen whatever we do. So even if tonight every single country in the world stopped emitting every single molecule of carbon, the climate will carry on changing for the next 30 or 40 or 50 years because of the carbon and other gases that have already been put out into the atmosphere. So both of those things need to be done. We need to get carbon down, and we need to adapt the way that we live, the places that we live, to manage the effects of a changing climate. And the good news about that is not only do we know what to do, but we're already starting to do some of those things, and the Environment Agency is part of that. So just to give you some examples of what we're doing, on the mitigation side, we're a regulator, as Charles said, and one of the things we do is regulate most of the industries in this country that put out greenhouse gases. And we are regulating down the amount of greenhouse gas that those industries put out year on year. We're also, now that Britain has left the European Union, we're also running something called the UK Emissions Trading System, which is a system whereby the emissions from heavy industry, things like steel production, aviation, they're capped, and industries can trade the amount of carbon units that they're allowed to put out with others to give them the headroom that they need, and those caps gradually come down. So we're playing a part in bringing down the amount of carbon that most of the industry in this country is putting out. We are also playing a part on the adaptation side, so making places in which we can live and live well under a changed climate. Two examples. One, we build and operate flood defences, and you can imagine that in a world in which sea level is rising, in which rainfall is increasing, flood risk is obviously going up. And you can also imagine fairly easily that most of the communities in this country, like most of the communities around the world, happen to be for very good reasons, either on the coast or on rivers, and therefore, unless we can become more resilient to the effects of climate, including in terms of flooding, we haven't successfully adapted. So one of the things we're doing to support adaptation is that work on flood defence. The second thing we're doing is we are a consultee on development and planning. So if someone wants to build a new town or a factory or do anything else, we're part of that decision-making process, and we work with local authorities and planning authorities up and down the country, not just to reduce the risk of flooding or pollution in new development, but to actually try and create better places that are more resilient to the effects of climate, so that when a place floods or when there's particularly high temperature, those communities don't suffer, or if they are hit, they can come back much more quickly to normal life. So on the one hand, mitigation, on the other, adaptation. We're also trying to walk the walk ourselves, because we're called the Environment Agency, and we think we need to demonstrate that in our own operations we're trying to live in the way that we want the rest of the country and the world to live. So a couple of years ago we set ourselves the target of becoming a net zero organisation by 2030. And we set ourselves an even more ambitious target of becoming an absolute zero organisation by 2050. So that would mean that by 2030 we would no longer be emitting in things that we do, the operations that we run, any more carbon than we are sealing up or accounting for. And it would mean that by 2050 we wouldn't be producing any carbon at all, zero. There is no organisation in the world that, as far as I know, that has set itself an absolute zero target. There's a very good reason for that, which is it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to get there. And even the net zero target that we've set ourselves for 2030 is going to be a really big challenge, because when we do the things that we do, like build our defences, we pour a lot of concrete, and concrete, as you will know, it tends to cause a lot of carbon to be emitted. And when we pump water out of people's houses, that emits a lot of carbon, because pumps at the moment are only essentially diesel. You can't get electric pumps that are big enough to do what we do. So we've knowingly set ourselves a challenge of getting somewhere by 2030 that we're not quite sure we know how to get to. But I think that's the right approach, because unless we take these risks, unless we trust ourselves to be ambitious and to innovate our way to solutions, we won't get where we want to get to. So finally, a word about optimism. I feel pretty optimistic, actually, about tackling the climate emergency, and it's not because I'm a natural optimist. I think I kind of am. It's because I think there are some quite good evidence-based reasons to be optimistic. I just wanted to conclude by sharing a few of those with you. The first reason why I'm optimistic is because the whole tone of international politics and debate has shifted in the last 5 or 6 years. So even when Rob and I were together in India, there wasn't really a collective agreement amongst the nations of the world about the need to tackle climate change and the measures that we take to do that. And that's changed. We have a president in Washington who is not a climate change denier, who has made some important commitments this week in Glasgow. If you think about the counterfactual, if Trump had been re-elected, I would be in a lot more pessimistic mind right now, because I think the Trump presidency would not have wanted to join the international consensus in support of tackling climate. India, which Rob and I know quite well, has just made a commitment to get itself to net zero by 2070. That's a long way away, but actually that's quite a big commitment for a country that is massively dependent on coal to lift its own 1.3 billion people out of poverty. And certainly when I was High Commissioner in India, the conversations with the Indian authorities were very, very difficult about whether they were prepared to do anything to tackle climate, and now they are, and that's a major win given the size of India. And China, which is the other major international player, for its own reasons, is also now much more prepared to take the steps that we all need China to take to tackle the climate emergency. So the first reason why I'm kind of upbeat that we will crack this is because I think that sort of international coalition that you need to crack this at global level is coming together. I think you're seeing some of that playing out now at Glasgow. Second reason I'm upbeat about this is business. Actually, a lot of business, although business is often demonised in the media, a lot of business is ahead of government or NGOs in terms of tackling the climate emergency. Why is that? Answer, because it's bad for business. Right? We deal a lot with water companies. I was talking to a water company chief executive last week, and he said, if we don't have any water in 20 years, then I don't have any business. And that logic, that pretty cold, hard, but inescapable logic, is playing itself out in the minds of every CEO of every major business around the world. So, if you are in a carbon-emitting business, you're getting out of it because you know that there isn't a future in carbon. You're getting lawsuits. You're taking massive reputational damage. And if you're really smart, you know that investing in new technologies that will replace the old carbon-based technologies, that's how you're going to get rich. So the second reason I'm optimistic is actually if you look around the world, and this is true just as much in the developing countries as it is in the West, you're seeing amazing innovation and experimentation from business, which itself through the market is starting to drive the change that we want to see in the world. And the third and final reason why I am upbeat is because people, ordinary people all around the world, including in this country, including in India, including in China, everywhere that I've been, ordinary people are demanding action from their governments. And that wasn't true 5 years ago either. But the more that it's become obvious that climate is a mortal threat to people's lives and livelihoods, the more people, farmers, fishermen, people living on coastlines, people that I met in the Sundarbans in India, for example, people who live on, in mountainous regions where the glaciers are just disappearing and there is no water. All those people around the world are, for very, very good reasons, demanding that their own governments do something about it. And because in my experience, pretty much all politicians, whether they are in sort of Western-style democracies or other nations, pretty much all politicians will normally do, ultimately, what they sense that most of their voters want them to do. That too gives me confidence that that pressure from around the world, from ordinary people around the world, which isn't going away, will only intensify, will increasingly force governments, even reluctant governments, to do the things that they need to do. So I'm an optimist about climate. We can talk about in a minute about whether you think that's reasonable or not. Just one other thing I wanted to say about why it's important to me. And it's important to me, and I know it's important to you, and the fact that you're here demonstrates it's important to you. It's important to me, for a very bunch of reasons. One, I kind of quite care about this planet, and I would like to leave it in a better state than I arrived in it. Two, I am a father of 3 daughters, and I'd quite like them to grow up in a better world, not a worse one than I was born into. And as I've said at the start of this talk, I think overall this is a better world if we don't spoil it by failing on climate. But the third reason I'm quite passionate about climate is because I also care about justice and human rights. And the thing about the climate emergency is that not only does it threaten to kill the planet, it has the worst and most extreme and most damaging effects on the people who least deserve it and can least cope with it. So, poor people in India are not the cause of the climate emergency. They're not the ones who are putting out large amounts of carbon. The West historically has been the cause of the climate emergency, and that's part of the dynamic in the negotiations. But the poor, whether they're in India or Greenland or Chile or anywhere else, are the ones who are least able to cope with the effects of climate change. Poor people tend to live, nearer rivers than rich people who live on hills. Poor people can't afford to move their house somewhere safer. Poor people don't have access to the healthcare that you need if you're suffering from a climate-related disease, and so on. So the final reason I really care about this is this is not just an ecological issue. It's not just a scientific issue. It's not just even a political issue. It's a justice issue. It's about ensuring justice for everybody. And if we do tackle the climate emergency properly, as I think we can and will, that'll be a fantastic legacy for the planet. So that's me. Thank you very much.